I know how this looks, but I promise you, I won't let the fact that the Menzingers are my favorite band influence anything I say in the video. Now with that said, I do think that the Menzingers are one of the best rock bands of all time. Hey everyone, it's Michael. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to talk about how the Menzingers changed punk rock. The Menzingers came up during a time of a lot of change in the punk rock scene. They came up in that 2010s emo revival or pop punk revival. Really, it was just a revival of alternative music in general. Social media really started impacting everybody's lives, and social media changed everything about the music industry. It changed how people got their music, it changed how people listened to their music, it changed how people discovered new music, it changed how people talked about music online forever. Despite all of that change, the Menzingers stood out in that crowded scene, and still to this day, the Menzingers are one of the most popular bands from that time period. And the band's 3-album run of On the Impossible Past, Rented World, and After the Party is legendary, not just in the punk rock scene, but in all of rock music. That's like the holy trinity of punk. Every few years, it feels like the alternative music scene gets an album that just takes over. An album that says, hey, we're here, and this is our time. For the Menzingers, that album was 2012's On the Impossible Past. If you weren't around in 2012, you might not understand how impactful this album was on punk rock at the time. Everyone was talking about it, and everyone basically said the same two things. On the Impossible Past was amazing, and no one knew what a Menzinger was. The album transcended genres, and whether you were more into emo, pop punk, punk rock, or hardcore, everyone in the scene liked this album. Now I know the Menzingers had 2 albums before On the Impossible Past, A Lesson in the Abuse of Information Technology, and Chamberlain Waits. But let's be honest with each other, the Menzingers didn't explode onto the scene until On the Impossible Past. The first 2 albums are okay, and from time to time I'll listen to something like Timetables or maybe the title track from the first album, but I really don't go back to these albums at all. I do have to shout out They Speak of My Drinking, but Never My Thirst. That's not only a great song, but an amazing song title. Why haven't we ever gotten those lyrics on any merch? Let's talk about how the Menzingers stood out and how their albums took over the scene. From their start in 2006, the Menzingers just always stood out. Their music was a little folk, a little indie, a little classic rock, and a lot of punk rock. And the thing that probably made the band stand out the most was their storytelling. Even with the band's early stuff like the title track on A Lesson in the Abuse of Information Technology, or Alpha Kappa Fell Off a Balcony, or even Sunday Morning, you could tell that the band was just different. The Menzingers have been compared to the Gaslight anthem pretty much since they started. Both bands were labeled with a Bruce Springsteen Americana sound. 59 Sound was released in 2008, and On the Impossible Past in 2012. The storytelling of the Menzingers and their emotional lyrics really changed the future of punk. Other bands did do something similar like Gaslight, who I mentioned before, but Bomb the Music Industry also deserves recognition for their style of storytelling punk as well. Bomb the Music Industry was a pretty big band if you were into punk, but I don't think anyone would argue that the band, and obviously I know this is his solo stuff, but Jeff Rosenstock didn't really get to that next level until Worry in 2016. I'd also throw in the Wonder Years as another band that was kind of using that storytelling style of punk in the 2010s. But the Wonder Years and the Menzingers, the Wonder Years were just more aligned with the pop punk scene, so they never really got that comparison to the Menzingers like Gaslight Anthem did. But when you think about it, the Menzingers and the Wonder Years should really have toured with each other at least once. I mean, The Greatest Generation is just On the Impossible Past, but more pop punky. On the Impossible Past was praised by everyone. It was on a ton of lists for being the best album of 2012, and it moved the Menzingers into that next level of popularity. Since the band's first 2 albums were pretty straightforward punk albums, the Menzingers had the respect of the punk rock scene for paying their dues, I guess, so when they went away from that sound for On the Impossible Past, there wasn't really any backlash. The album embraces emotion. It lets you know that it's okay to be lost, to be confused. The album opens up with the perfectly titled Good Things, and the band tells us, I've been having a horrible time pulling myself together. I've been closing my eyes to find the old familiar failures. I've been having a horrible time. How could you not relate to that? The album came out my freshman year in college, so I was, like the perfect age for this album to speak to me, and the album became the soundtrack to my youth, and the band would eventually become the soundtrack to almost every important moment in my youth. I always loved the lyrics, like when we would take rides in your American muscle car, I felt American for once in my life, I never felt it again. Those lyrics always remind me of the time I was working at a movie theater. I had gone on break and I was sitting in my car in my 1995 Chevy Lumina, listening to the radio and eating a slice of Sbarro pizza that I got from the mall, and a White Sox game happened to be on the radio, and the pitcher eventually pitched a no-hitter. So based on, I'm not a big baseball fan, so I looked it up, and that would have been April 21st, 2012. So shout out to Philip Humber. And yeah, I bring that all up to say I don't think I've ever felt more American than in that moment. We have to talk about Obituaries. I can't believe it took till 2012 for a punk band to have the chorus, I will F this up, I effing know it. I love that song. Obviously, it's a dark song. The person in that song is basically having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, but realizes at the end of the song, I'm just freaking out. Yeah, I'll be fine. Among all the other perfect Menzingers songs, this one is also perfect. And of course, how can we forget the iconic Menzinger lyrics? 'Cause I cursed my lonely memory with picture-perfect imagery. With On the Impossible Past, the Menzingers went away from that kind of cliche, angsty punk rock, but they kept the catchy hooks and melodies. The album explored nostalgia and romanticizing the past. The album presented a raw perspective on regrets, failures, and love. It's a punk rock classic. I always thought of Rented World as the band's emo album, from the dark album cover to the extremely dark lyrics. I always found it funny that Rented World has one of the band's most popular songs, currently the band's biggest song on at least Spotify, I Don't Want to Be an Asshole Anymore. It's on Rented World, and it really sounds like none of the other songs on the album. I Don't Want to Be an Asshole, The Talk, In Remission are all classic punk songs, but the rest of the songs on the album are all dark, moody, and intense. At the end of the day, yes, it's all punk rock and rock music, but Rented World has such a big difference in tone on certain songs. It's like the Menzingers recorded Rented World and went, hey, this is pretty dark. Let's put some bright, fast punk songs to balance it out, and that's how we got I Don't Want to Be an Asshole, The Talk, and In Remission. I think the lyrics of Bad Things get my point across. I'm gonna do it this time, pull it this time. I also love Rodent, I Want to Be Discreet, I Want 'em all to quit following me, In the Walls Held Captive, Lives a Mouse, I Don't Have the Guts to Kick 'em Out. In the bars where I live, lives someone who I would have hated when I was young. When I swore life had a purpose, when I was sure the whole thing's worth it. Damn the days we took for granted, never again will I let anyone close to me. I just think the song is so powerful and so symbolic in a way of, obviously the band is comparing themselves to a rodent, a mouse, or a rat, and trying to, live but also hide from people. It's just a beautifully written, sad song. And if you didn't think Rented World was a dark album, let me point you to these lyrics. I've tried running, I've tried hiding, I've tried everything but dying. I think Rented World is the Menzingers at their most dark, their most vulnerable. They're uncertain of the future, and they're searching for any sign of hope. Lucky for us, the band does give us a few bright moments on the album, and the more I thought about it, that's just life, right? The good times mixed with the bad. If Rented World was the Menzingers at their darkest, then the band's next album, After the Party, was like the first day of spring after a long, cold winter. When people talk about the Menzingers, they talk about On the Impossible Past and After the Party. Both albums are perfect in my opinion, but perfect in different ways. And it doesn't matter which one you like more, there's no wrong answer. After the Party is about turning 30. What is life like after the party that is your 20s? And the band tells you that's what the album is about with the first song, Tellin' Lies. This theme is brilliantly put on display on Lookers. Lost in a picture frame, the way my body used to behave, the way I smiled in the moment, before it permanently froze. But that was the old me. I was such a looker in the old days. As someone from Chicago, I do have to bring up how awesome of a moment it is whenever the band does come to Chicago. I feel like they're almost required to play Midwestern states just so the entire crowd can sing along to the lyrics. I know somewhere in Chicago where we can stay for a while. I've been lucky enough to be a part of that crowd when that moment's happening, and it's just awesome.
This isn't a party. Thanks for having us over.
Okay, I have to bring this up because I've been thinking about this for years, ever since I first heard this song. Charlie's Army is about Romeo and Juliet, right? I wrote down my thoughts if you're not with me here. The singer is in love with Juliet. They just call her Julie. The band replaces Romeo with Charlie just because it works better. I mean, the lyrics are, tell your man I ain't afraid to die if loving Julie is a capital crime. I love my Juliet, but her ex-boyfriend wants me dead. I mean, it's about Romeo and Juliet, right? Was that obvious to anybody, or am I going crazy? Bad Catholics, Your Wild Years, all great songs, but you know why we're here. The title track, After the Party, I mean, it's a perfect song. That opening guitar riff, it's so bouncy and you just want to dance around. All you want to do is sing along to the song. The lyrics are some of the best in punk rock history. I don't want to hear it. And, I mean, that song makes you nostalgic for a relationship you didn't even have. I mean, come on. How can you not love these lyrics? Everybody wants to get famous, but you just want to dance in a basement. You don't care if anyone is watching, just as long as you stay in motion. We put miles on these old jean jackets, got caught up in the drunk conversations, but after the party, it's me and you. After the party, it's me and you. And of course, the music video. It should have won an Oscar for Best Short Story. I 100% believe this. I'm not saying this just for like a hot take in a video. In my bones, I believe that the Menzingers are one of the best rock bands of all time. Definitely, easily in the last 10 years. I am so tired of talking about the same 20 rock bands as if rock music just didn't exist after 2007, 2008. How the Menzingers, pick any popular Menzingers song, how any of those songs didn't take over rock radio or alternative radio, whatever you want to call it, makes absolutely no sense to me. Just make it make sense, but you can't, because it's not just radio, rock radio, alternative radio, it just sucks. I mean, that's the answer. I'll briefly talk about the last two Menzingers albums. Hello Exile has one of the best Menzingers songs ever, which is Anna. I mean, literally everything about that song is perfect. America, You're Freaking Me Out is another song I always come back to. It was always going to be hard to follow After the Party, but Hello Exile actually does a pretty good job. After the Party was about going into your 30s, and Hello Exile is all about saying farewell to youth. The band's most recent album, some of it was true, was just okay. I really wanted to love this one, and I honestly don't really have any hot takes on the album. The Menzingers are my favorite band, so I'm always going to love getting new music. Hope is a Dangerous Little Thing, Try, Come On Heartache, Ultraviolet are pretty much the only songs I go back to on the album, and everything else is kind of just there. Some of it was true isn't horrible at all, but when you compare it to the rest of the Menzingers' amazing discography, it just doesn't stand out. The Menzingers changed punk rock by adding storytelling and honest lyrics into their songs. That's why they are still one of the biggest punk bands, one of the biggest modern punk bands playing music today. A lot of the Menzingers songs lyrically are sad, but they're presented in such a fun, optimistic way that the overall vibe of the Menzingers is hopeful and positive. The Menzingers are a friend that's letting you know it's gonna be okay, because after the party, it's me and you. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, it really helps out the channel. Subscribe if you haven't, share the video if you enjoyed it, and as always, thanks for watching.